Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to part two as we look at the letters of John. And we finished off with First John. So now let's move into Second and Third John regarding church issues here. And I do have to say, as someone that belongs to a liturgical tradition, the word liturgy refers to public ministry, public worship. Never once can I recall ever hearing during the liturgy of the word, that would be the scriptures being read in church, never once have I heard second and third John being read. And that may be because there's really not much to them. Second and third John were likely written by the same author, with second John being written sometime after first John. I mentioned this at the start of the lecture over the letters of John, that second and third John were likely written by the same individual because the writing style, the rhetoric is very, very similar. And second John was certainly written sometime after first John. How much later, I don't exactly know. Um, but we'll look at a big reason for why I would say that. Second John is a presbyter slash elder, or we could say priest in contemporary times, writing to a specific church. That is the elder to the lady being a reference likely to a church, while third John is a presbyter slash elder writing to a Christian named Gaius. And so some notes to make here. Is the presbyter slash elder possibly a bishop? And I have there a reference to consider First Peter, the opening to chapter 5 of the first letter of Peter. In the opening to the first letter of Peter, or I shouldn't say the opening, I'm sorry, the opening of chapter 5 of the first letter of Peter, the author, if it is Peter dictating it, states how he is a fellow elder, a fellow presbyter. But could, this particular presbyter slash elder in John be a bishop? And to say something about that, all bishops are presbyters slash priests, but not all presbyters slash priests are bishops. And in the case with, Peter, he would be the chief presbyter or priest, the chief elder. And that would be the case with any bishop for, a diocese. In the case, with the author of Second and Third John, is he possibly a bishop? He could be. That's not explicitly clear, but it could be that he is actually a bishop, but is referring to himself as the elder. Well, who is Gaius, or who was Gaius in Third John? It's a very good question, as Gaius was a common Latin name. Lots of people were referred to as Gaius as their first name. I believe both Julius Caesar and Augustus, their first names were actually Gaius, I think. I believe that's the case certainly with Julius Caesar and with Augustus. But anyway, it was a common name. Gaius could have possibly been a fellow bishop. There is a Gaius that's listed among the early bishops of Ephesus. So it could have been the same individual, could have been a different individual, or Gaius may not have reached that point yet within the life of the church that he was, now a bishop. Maybe he was a member of the lower members of the clergy, or maybe he wasn't a member of the clergy at all at this point. Is the Antichrist from First John now just any Docetism Gnostic? The thing with this particular passage is how in First John, of course, it talks about how those that went away um, were antichrist, but how there would be, like the antichrist. And now in Second John, anyone who apparently holds to Docetism, Gnosticism is an antichrist or is the antichrist. So it's not, just one individual now, but many. Perhaps a change in points of view that the Antichrist has taken on a plural form rather than a singular form. But as for Docetism, Gnosticism, because I mentioned how, there were various forms of Gnosticism, Docetism would be a form in this case that would deny that Jesus was truly a human being. They would state that he was actually a pure spirit. Now, for our empirical senses, he did all the things that a normal human being would do, but he was actually a pure spirit. And this was an early form of course, Christian heresy, Christian Gnosticism. The word Docetism refers to seem. And one other point here is how Diotrephes seems to need a reminder on who is in charge. Diotrephes or Diotrephes, we don't know exactly who he was. It's not mentioned in the text that we have. It's possible that he could have been a lower member of the clergy, possibly a deacon, or maybe he was a prominent layperson, but he seems to have trouble with authority figures. And the author of Third John essentially is stating that he needs a reminder on who is in charge, and that would be us. I mean, if he was perhaps a deacon, because even though the deacons are the lowest part of the ordained clergy, the ordained priesthood, often many of them were in positions of prominence, and perhaps Diotrephes, or excuse me, Diotrephes thought that he was in a similar position, that he was above those that essentially would be above him, or he didn't have to listen to them, whether that was the presbyter slash priest or the bishop. And so he needs a reminder on who is in charge. Or maybe he wasn't a member of the clergy, but he was just a prominent lay person. And, you know, with whatever prominence that he had, he thought that he didn't need to listen to, the authority figures. And the author of Third John is telling Gaius that no, he needs a reminder on who is in charge here. So, anyway, that's essentially it for the letters of John. So, if you do have any questions, please send me an email. Till then, take care.